A fragile peace is holding in Juba, that's the capital of South Sudan, after recent violence that killed hundreds and displaced thousands. This is nothing new, unfortunately, for the young nation. It is in the midst of a humanitarian crisis and could possibly become a failed state. Omar.
That's right, Femi. And despite a series of peace deals, fighting between two political factions continues. And the fate of the government and the role of the United Nations have been thrown into question. Today on the stream, how can South Sudan find its way to a lasting peace?
Good to see you. I'm Femi OK.
And I'm Omar Badar.
5 years ago, South Sudan celebrated a split from the north, but that celebration didn't last very long. Soon a power struggle turned into a full-scale war in 2013 between two sides. These latest clashes have pitted soldiers loyal to President Salva Kiir against troops backing his rival Vice President Riek Machar. Both leaders have said that they back a peace process, but their rivalry has created a series of more complicated issues like corruption, unprecedented levels of food insecurity, and economic turmoil.
So, is intervention needed by the international community? On Sunday, the violence in South Sudan topped the agenda at the African Union summit held in Uganda. The UN Secretary General Ban Ki-moon wants the Security Council to take 3 steps: impose an arms embargo, place targeted sanctions on South Sudanese leaders, and fortify an already 12,000-strong UN peacekeeping force in the country.
Joining us on our set to discuss South Sudan's possible ways to peace, Brian Adeba is the Associate Director of Policy at the Enough Project. From Juba, South Sudan, Ateni Wekateni is the spokesman for the President of South Sudan, Salva Kiir.
And in Nairobi, Kenya, James Gadet Dak is the spokesperson for the South Sudanese Vice President, Riek Machar. And in Toronto, Canada, we have Emmanuel Jal. He is a South Sudanese musician and peace activist.
Gentlemen, it's good to have you here in this conversation. Emmanuel, I am just trying to think about family members, friends that you still have in South Sudan. When we talk about violent clashes, we talk about humanitarian issues. Can you tell us a story that actually helps us connect with the people who are living there and what's happening?
What the story I could add is what is really sad is how international community voice out the news like the war in South Sudan is a tribal war. That's not the case. What's actually happening is the men in the uniform that are actually killing civilians. So my sister has been sleeping in a place where there's dead people, and she has actually witnessed civilians getting killed. And one of the greatest stories what she told me is that she was planning to escape in the airport. The Dinka woman had to pretend that it's her daughter. That's how she was able to escape. So if you look at a situation like that, finding South Sudanese themselves risking their own life to cover their own citizens, this is, in my side, I see there's hope in my country. But the bad part of this conversation, the focus still go into the fight, but people are forgetting the civilians that are suffering now.
Yeah, we actually have the spokesman of two of the most important sides, the prominent sides of the Vice President and also the President with us in this conversation. I want to show you something here on my laptop. We're just looking at what people were looking for if they didn't know what was happening in South Sudan. What did they Google? What were they searching for here? Number 2, it's really important. Why is South Sudan fighting? James, why is your country fighting? You only just a few years ago, had a peace process. You separated from Sudan. You're the youngest country. There's so much hope. Why are you fighting?
Well,
James.
This is very unfortunate that the young country continues to fight against itself after independence in 2011. To me, we have a leadership failure in the person of President Salva Kiir, who is lacking in many aspects. First of all, he is not democratic. He fears democracy, and he does want the country to move towards democratic processes. This is one. Then is someone who is not uniting. He has split the country on tribal basis. Even currently, is dependent on a tribal organization, which is called the Jiang or Dinka Council of Elders. This is an organization composed of Dinka intellectuals and prominent government officials. they provide him with informal advice, which he depends on to make critical decisions. Also, he encourages corruption, and of course, I believe that he is involved.
So this is, James, so these are all reasons, James, for why you are still fighting?
Yes, this is the genesis of what brought this endless fighting. But if I want to bring it to the recent one, I would say that it is the lack of commitment to the implementation of the peace agreement which was signed last year.
Yeah,
because if you can recall,
one of the things that people are discussing, James, online is the fact that the military is divided. So we have Titus over here on Facebook who's commenting saying these two guys, referring to the president and the vice president, will continue to fight unless they resolve to have a neutral army. But as far now, each party has its own army. Just imagine that. And we have somebody commenting, Neil, along similar lines on Twitter, saying any attempt to stabilize South Sudan must end at unifying the army under one command. Two military solutions is just not going to work. Ateni, is there a failure of leadership in trying to build what would be a basic institution for a functioning country, just a united army?
No, my understanding of leadership, as my brother Gadet actually put it, is including first Vice President Machar, because first Vice President Machar was the Vice President to His Excellency Salva Kiir Mayardit for 8 years. And so if there is a leadership failure, it will also include Machar. But the truth of the matter is that what has actually happened in South Sudan and what has put South Sudan into mess is the unwillingness of Machar to follow the hierarchy of the Sudan People Liberation Movement, which is the political party that is governing South Sudan and the political party that fought for the independence of Republic of South Sudan. If you talk about corruption, you would find also Machar was the one sitting over over the corrupt practices in Juba, because President Salva Kiir was first vice president in Khartoum. So it is Machar to be blamed about how the money of South Sudanese went missing, when in actual fact under his watch, he was the one who was overseeing a day-to-day work in South Sudan. Coming to what is the way forward, my brother Gadet should have understand that the President of Republic, Salva Kiir Mayardit, is not the problem, and the people of South Sudan will one day, repent if Salva Kiir leave power, and then the like of Machar come to power. They will see the difference between who is a real Sudanese, South Sudanese, who love nations, and those who only want to love themselves. The tribal army he is talking about, or the Young Leaders Council. The Young Leaders Council does not give President Salva Kiir any advice. And there's no single advice from Young Leaders Council that President Salva Kiir has ever taken. Young Leader Council is like Nuer Leader Council, Council of Leaders, which was mediating between Gadet.
I'm just going to bring in Brian here. Brian's in our studio. I just want to bring Brian's comment into the studio here. Brian,
absolutely.
Go ahead.
Thank you for giving me the chance. So in South Sudan, where we are right now is because the political elite, and Ateni is right to say that includes Riek Machar, the political elite instituted a system of government that was so corrupt. So why we are having a war at the moment is because different factions, two factions of the ruling elite of the SPLM, that includes the faction led by Riek Machar and the faction led by Salva Kiir, are fighting over the spoils of state. They instituted a system in which all governance institutions that would mitigate the excesses of government officials was stymied. They hijacked these institutions, put them in their pockets, and made them ineffective. And that's why we have a war in South Sudan at the moment. Coming to why the current conflict broke out on Thursday, the implementation of the peace agreement has been delayed. It created an atmosphere of mistrust, suspicion, and killings of members of the SPLM-IO. So when the meeting happened on Thursday, tempers were already high, and something happened and hell broke loose. So that's why we are at the moment. We are in a situation where there's fighting because of mistrust.
Let me just play something here. This is Hawa. She is from our community, suggesting maybe the way forward. Have a listen to what she has to say.
The IDPs in South Sudan are going through a very difficult situation, and what should be done is the international community, AU members, EU members, United Nations members and other international partners to come together as one and have a roundtable discussion with the leaders of South Sudan and know how to resolve the crisis and also bring peace to their nation. Thank you.
Emmanuel, you pointed out that as the political machinations continue, that there are people, real people down on the ground who are suffering. That's really what Howell was actually talking about. Where do you think the responsibility of the international community actually is? How do you think they might be able to help move this situation forward?
I think the international community should just step in just for the sake of the people to be alive, because the country has failed, the leadership has failed, there's no vision. I'm not even safe to go to Juba. There's no justice, there's no equality, there's no freedom of speech. So what we would require for this to happen is there should be a third army in the city, clear all those forces, let them stay out of the city, and put a system in place, a buffer zone, and in that process, allow the democratic system to place. What I would suggest is both leaders should even stay aside, put a new government in place, and then they form their own parties and run for election. Then unite the army.
So there is a question on who that third party is that should be intervening. So we have people who are suggesting online that it should be the African Union. Ocheklia over here says the African Union needs to put these men under pressure so that they oust them from office and remove them from the military. And we have somebody who goes even further, Adideon over here, who says the African Union should sack the two leaders, arrest them for war crimes, hold a referendum in the country, and get new visionary leaders. James, I mean, forget the specific proposals here, but do you see that the African Union is the right party to be intervening in this situation to try to get some kind of situation resolved?
Well, we are for third-party force, and this should be under the mandate of the United Nations mission in South Sudan. It should not be any other party apart from the United Nations mission in South Sudan. This would be a temporary solution to the ongoing crisis, especially in the capital, Juba. But any other party, another force coming outside of the United Nations mission in South Sudan, we will not accept this.
Ateni, how much interaction have you had with the UN Secretary General and the United Nations?
Well, the international community is not going to devise a solution that is not acceptable to people of South Sudan and the government of South Sudan. As two former warring parties, the government and the SPLA-IO, were implementing peace agreement. Last time, the international community failed to accept the advice we gave them. We said two armies will not be workable. It's supposed to have only 3 months of free transitions, and you amalgamate all the forces so that they are under one command. And if the first vice president is also to accept that he's part of the government, he shouldn't have, his own forces. Now, it was seen on Friday how devastating is having two armies. Now, another mistake the international community want to make is to bring the third party force, which is not, of course, acceptable to us, because Dr. Machar has no personal problem with President Salva Kiir, because on Friday, when the forces of Riek Machar triggered a fight, which erupted in the State House, and their forces and Machar forces were thwarted, President Salva Kiir protected Riek Machar, and it is shown to the well that President Salva Kiir cares about Riek Machar as his brother. So the best thing is for Machar to abandon the issue of having the two armies. And so if Machar is to come...
Just to jump in here a bit, Brian, I know that you react a little bit with what you heard, that you disagree with some of it, but actually specifically on the point of whether the people would actually accept international intervention. Interestingly enough, we're hearing from people online who actually agree with that view, that the people would not accept it. So we have Disco over here who says, international community usually uses human rights as an alibi to commit violence. Involving them would greatly devastate the country. Adiogon over here says they brought the chaos in the first place. And on Facebook, we have Mahmoud who says they, referring to the international community, should leave the country and stop meddling in local politics, then peace will prevail. How widespread is that sentiment in the country, in your view?
Well, the country is polarized, so that sentiment is not representative of all South Sudanese. It's a sentiment that is coming from the base of the powers that be. You know, they are very scared that when a third force comes in, some of their powers will be clipped. That's basically the reason. So it's not representative. It should not be taken as the last word. We need a third force in South Sudan. Without a third force, the country will disintegrate. So that third force, however, should come in through a mutual agreement with all the parties involved in this conflict. It should not be an end in itself, but it should be part of a larger political paradigm or solution that will eventually culminate in ending the conflict.
James, if you were going to look at a third force, would that be something that would be acceptable to Vice President Machar?
Yes, this would be acceptable to the first Vice President, and he has also voiced his concern about this issue. But first of all, let me try to, explain some issues raised by my colleague Atengwak. Actually, the fighting at the UN Palace was not triggered by Machar's forces. If I can give you the chronology of what happened, first of all, President Salva's forces killed our intelligence officer by the name Lieutenant Colonel George Gizma, and then they fired at our forces who were traveling in a vehicle on a road called Gudelle. And then President Salva Kiir, setting up Machar, invited him to the palace to meet and address some of the security issues. And once Machar came with few bodyguards, his bodyguard and other forces in 100 teamed up and attacked Machar forces at the palace. Imagine. And this triggered the fight. And as Machar was trying to contend the situation because he controlled his forces not to come to town to attack, then on Sunday, President Salva Kiir again launched his forces to attack Machar residence. They bombed the residence. And this was not the first time. They did in 2013.
James, let me just share this. Let me share this with our audience because I feel that this is very appropriate. James, just hold tight for a moment. Let me just share this with our audience. This comes from Secretary General Ban Ki-moon. He says, regardless of your timeline and also of Ateni's timeline, this seems quite pertinent. Yet again, the leaders of South Sudan have failed their people. Rarely has a country squandered so much promise so quickly. What kind of leadership is it that resorts to deadly weapons and identity politics time and again? Failed leadership. Emmanuel, that is a really powerful statement from the Secretary General of the UN. Do you concur? Do you think the people of South Sudan feel the same way?
The people of South Sudan, the government, they've never benefited from the government. They want to have freedom to cultivate, live their lives. 98% of the money that comes from the oil just was in corrupt situation. I think our leaders have failed to allow us to have peace. Look, I'm a refugee in Canada. Why? I moved to South Sudan before and I wanted to settle down, do a peace concert, invested heavily, and I was beaten. And the security people told me we don't like activists here because you talk too much. Because I saw so many people suffering and I want to open my mouth, I was almost killed. Ateni knows about that. So we have smart people that would be welcomed into the country by just allowing them to be safe. So now, recently a journalist named Taban, just by speaking his mind, he made a statement, and because of that, the newspaper was closed down. So there's certain issues that the government need to put. Not everybody is supporting the rebel movement, but if they continue to create this abuse, with time, there's going to be a revolution. You know, you can't use force on people. Give people freedom. Let them have the freedom of speech. Let them bark. There's a saying in my mother tongue where it says, like, whoever is feeling pain, allow them to scream as much as they can. Let them shout, let them talk, let them cuss, and then there is peace. But now if you shut people's mouth, it's not going to happen. So for international community to step in, with combination working with the African Union, like the East African, even involving Uganda, involving Sudan, involving all Ethiopia and all of these people, they are part of South Sudan. They all invested in South Sudan.
Emmanuel,
but if it's not...
You know, specifically on the point that you were just talking about giving people a voice, we actually got a video comment from Adeyo talking specifically about this. Check it out.
South Sudanese youth want everlasting peace. Peace that unifies the 64 tribes. Peace that will finally see healing. And peace that will lead to the development of South Sudan. South Sudanese youth want to have their own future in their hands, not in the hands of the elite few who are out of touch with today's youth and what the youth want. We need a comprehensive peace, peace that will be long-lasting, and peace that will include everyone, including the youth who are the future of the country.
Brian, yeah, just what do you think the role of the youth would be in this situation?
The youth have a place to play in South Sudan. However, what we have seen right now is that parochialism determines who gets what in South Sudan. We have an ethnicized system in every facet of life, in every facet of government, whether it's the army, the military, the police, the civil service, the diplomatic corps. All hiring is parochial, it's based on ethnicity. So a lot of youth who are able to get those opportunities are likely to have come from the power base that is distributing those positions. So yes, she is right, the youth do have a place, but right now that capacity is being inhibited by the parochialism that exists across the board in South Sudan. Now I just wanted to bring you to the point about what needs to happen. We've talked about the need for a foreign force to come in as a buffer. We also need to create consequences for the leaders of South Sudan, the political elite.
What do you mean by consequences?
Well, we should be looking at targeted sanctions to hit them where it matters most, in their pockets. This war is all about corruption, it's all about money. As long as there are no consequences for those who are perpetrating the conflict, the leaders of the political elite on both sides of the political divide, this war will continue. We need to make sure that this does not continue to happen by creating consequences for them. And I'm talking about targeted sanctions.
All right, let me just put up another suggestion. This was very popular at Tenny in our community about how do we actually get out of this current situation? Look what Charlie suggested here. South Sudan will never know peace for as long as the president and deputy are in charge. The two must go. And from Samuel here, of course, both Riek Machar and also President Kiir should step aside if they respect their country. Is there a way that actually maybe these two leaders that have been warring for so many years could actually step out of the picture and then allow South Sudan to progress from there? That is a radical suggestion, Ateni. What do you make of that?
Yes, in order to come back to a missing link before I provide the way forward, I wanted to make this clear to my brother James Gadet that the world is undergoing a very serious problem whereby an eyewitness is argued by somebody who hear on either Facebook or somebody called him to tell him James Gadet was not in his state house on Friday. Dr. Machar came with 20 trucks that are mounted. It was not only few bodyguards. And the killing on the 7th of July, that was on Thursday, it was the Machar soldiers, one lieutenant colonel, to whom he was referring to, is the one who started shooting our forces at the checkpoint and killed them instantly. So President Salva Kiir, please let me finish. President Salva Kiir called Machar because the security situation in Juba to discuss the security situation, and his forces started shooting.
So because we have a delay, Ateni, I apologise about that. It's a very long delay. So by the time I say what I say and you say what you say, we've lost almost 20 seconds of the programme. But we will pick up where we left off in our post show at stream.outerzero.com. Brian, you were saying very, very quickly about this truth. Go ahead.
The truth is out there. No one knows. In war, truth is the first casualty. What Ateni is saying and what James Gadet is saying, we don't know. It's just their sides of the story. We don't have a definitive version of the story.
The one thing I do know, though, is that we will continue this conversation online. Hopefully you can make it. Omar and I will be there. Stream.outerzero.com. See you online. Thanks for watching. Hello again. We're talking about South Sudan and how do you get to a place where you have a lasting peace. Ateni, thank you so much for bearing with us. We have a very long delay between you and me, so I had to truncate that little bit that you were about to say. But please pick up. You were trying to tell us how you were telling us. I don't want to say your version, so you just pick up and then you tell us what you wanted to tell us. Ateni, go ahead. All right, let me start here. This is what I wanted to ask you, and I'm going to repeat it again. A number of people in our community wanted to say perhaps the way forward would be if the Vice President and the President stepped aside. Ateni, is that possible? The two people who have been warring for so long, who also call themselves brothers, but don't behave like brothers who like each other, what would happen if they stepped aside? Is that possible for the sake of the country?
Well, the two can work. The two leaders can work perfectly well, because President Salva Kiir said it on Monday that First Vice President Machar is still his first Vice President, and they are determined to implement a peace agreement. The issue of international community coming in is simply because they have not even allowed the people of South Sudan to devise their own, solutions. And Dr. Machar and President Salva Kiir, if they are allowed or given time, without those forces that coming to, to each other, they will be able to get a better way forward, instead of just complicating things by proposing the third party force, which of course will not be acceptable, because it will aggravate the situation in South Sudan, because there are already 12,000 UN troops who have not done anything. So why increasing more forces in South Sudan?
So specifically on the question of whether they can step aside and whether that would make any difference, we have people weighing in online on this as well. Adiasi over here says, where in Africa do warlords retire? And then we have Ghassan over here who says, stepping aside will never solve a tribal problem. And Emmanuel, that particular thought, I want to toss it your way. If you just get rid of the leadership, Ghassan is suggesting that this is a much more entrenched problem, that it really won't make any difference. Would you agree with that?
What I'll say is that the thing is, we just need to establish a system that works, now, a system that will bring justice, equality, and freedom for all. Well, we have to understand what is peace. Peace is when there's food on somebody's belly. Peace is conflict management. Peace is opportunities. Peace is providing medication. Peace is putting kids to school. Peace is the services, allowing the citizens to have the peace so they can work. At the moment, there's interference. The citizens are not productive. That's why the country is even poor. If we have a third force coming in to just be in the middle, and then even if both leaders step aside, and then a new neutral leader is selected just to be an interim leader for at least 2 years, if they all want to run for presidency, they should be given the right to run, and the public can vote for them. Then we have a system that, okay, you win, take the power. You win, take it. So we have to create a system that can work. At the moment, they had 8 years. 8 years has been there. That system has not been created. Why? Give the people their freedom to speak. Ateng is a government official who is being paid either to lie for the government or say the truth for the government. The spokesperson for Dr. Machar can either do the same, either lie or speak the truth. So now, what I'm calling out is the people of South Sudan. It should never be said again, never and never again. It happened in Rwanda, and they say it will never happen again. It happened in South Sudan. Now, South Sudan has become the #1 failed state. We're #1 after Syria. Syria is #6. Now, how would you call yourself that? We have half of the population starving. The guns that are being fired is against the citizen. Those people who are dying now are your brothers and sisters. So I think a third party, I would suggest that I never want a third party to come in. If it is going to be Kenya, Uganda, Rwanda, Ethiopia, if you're going to add Sudan, I don't mind, but at least in United Nations, it's just going to be a force of collective of international bodies that care about human rights.
Well, I echo what Emmanuel says. I also want to add that South Sudan is at a very, very critical juncture at the moment. It's sitting on a cliff. One small nudge and it will tumble over the cliff. And when that happens, you will have Rwanda in 1994 plus Somalia in 1999 combined. We'll have ethnic pogroms taking place across the country and a total disintegration of the state. So the international community has a role to play. They have to step in. Left to their own devices, the two politicians, Riek Machar and Salva Kiir, won't take South Sudan anywhere.
It doesn't bode well for South Sudan that the international community has to step in. That hasn't worked well in the past or at all.
True, but it can be done. We have seen that stabilization forces have come in a number of scenarios in several countries in the past.
For example?
Well, you could say Bosnia. Bosnia has happened and Bosnia stabilized. So it's not all doom and gloom. There's something that can be done.
The Bosnia example is specifically a military one, and interestingly enough, we have people actually coming to you with this, James. We have people who are actually suggesting that specifically. Equatoria over here says military intervention should be one of the options to save lives in Juba. No, one wonders what the 12,000 UN army is doing there in South Sudan. Of course, they're there not exactly for military intervention per se. But we have Happy People Party over here who, it's kind of an interesting suggestion. You don't hear it too often, saying the way to resolve this conflict is by giving war a chance to let one side have a decisive victory over the other. James, is there any possibility for a military solution in this conflict? I mean, I know it's distasteful for many to hear, but can it actually work? Is that a possibility?
Well, first, let me comment on whether it is possible to throw away both leaders, President Salva Kiir and First Vice President Riek Machar. To me, it is unfair. It's like saying you can throw away a bad apple and a good apple just because they happen to be in the same basket. I think the problem between President Salva Kiir and Riek Machar is that they don't share vision in South Sudan. While Riek Machar wants democratic development, peaceful South Sudan, Salva Kiir, on the other side, wants to impose his own people who are corrupt. And if you remember, in 2013, for the crisis, Riek Machar came up with 6 points. He was trying to advise his president, Salva Kiir, that if those 6 points were not addressed, the country was going to go into turmoil. And this included tribalism, corruption, and the rest. But because President Salva Kiir was not willing to listen, then this created a crisis. Although President Salva Kiir was the first vice president, if I can go back to the comment of my colleague, when he was first vice president of the Republic of Sudan and was the president of Southern Sudan, he was the one in charge. He was the one who was appointing corrupt leaders who were doing corruption, and he could not even...
James, we wanted to move forward with this rather than go backwards. So Omar, just recap what you asked, James, because we're almost out of time.
Essentially, whether a military solution is on the table as a possibility. Can it possibly solve this issue?
Of this problem, because if you just cut it from yesterday, you will not understand how it came about. So these two leaders are two different people. To say that they can be thrown away just because they happen to be in the same basket, and one is a bad apple and one is good apple, is not fair. Where are you going to get an angel? You will not get an angel, even if you get a third person who is not from the two leaders. He may be as bad as President Salva Kiir. So let us just judge the two leaders on their deeds, what they have been doing, what is their vision, not just because they're in the same country and they have been, conflicting. So let us see how do they conflict, who is right and who is wrong.
Let me just move over to Ateni here. Ateni, James used an analogy or a metaphor, a good apple and a bad apple. I'm assuming that he's saying that the good apple is the vice president, the bad apple is the president. That I'm assuming because he is the spokesperson there for the vice president. But I'm concerned, and I'm not from South Sudan, but I care deeply about a country that I've been covering for many, many years. What is the way forward? What do you do now? I don't hear, even if I'm just listening to the spokesman, I don't hear any ground where you actually will compromise at all.
Let me first say the opposite is true, as what my brother James Gadet has just said. The great impediments to key leadership is Riek Machar, because Dr. Riek Machar has never allowed President Salva Kiir to, to recover at all, so that he can look at the bigger thing, deliver services, and do a political work in the country. Simply because Dr. Riek Machar just wants to be the president. Without being the president, then South Sudan must not be in any kind of stability. This is the problem. If President Salva Kiir, if Dr. Riek was to allow President Salva Kiir to just finish 5 years term without just making, putting a lot of impediment on the 5 years term, he would have been the president. President Salva Kiir would have given him, the time, to finish. But he did not allow this, and he started war. I don't know why my brother Gadet says that, Kiir has been tribalist, and so Dr. Riek Machar is better than Kiir. This is not true, because even the army they have is 100% the Nuer. I don't know why, being tribalist is something just those of Gadet will just throw it like that. If you look at our army, there are a good number of Nuer. Only that you don't accept them because you are tribalist, you don't accept them. If there is Nuer who is within the government, you don't think is a good Nuer.
This is why I'm concerned, because you have a list of grievances, James has a list of grievances, and you just keep arguing about your grievances. This is why I'm concerned. If I wanted to ask you about what's the way forward, you just gave me a list of grievances. Do you have a way forward, or shall I wrap up the show? Ateni.
No, the way forward for me is that we don't need to renegotiate the agreement. The agreement on resolution of conflict in the Republic of South Sudan has to remain. If there are international community guys who wanted to renegotiate peace agreement by saying they want to bring the hybrid, what is called the third force party, then they are renegotiating an agreement. Therefore, we have to go back also and renegotiate also on foot, or correct what was not corrected at the time when peace agreement was signed. Otherwise, President Salva Kiir is determined to see Riek Machar coming back so that they implement the peace agreement. Otherwise, that is the only way forward. We implement this peace agreement. At 18 months' time, we unite our armies so that they fall under one command. And in 2018, we go for election. Nobody feared the election. Okay? It is only those who wanted to kill people using guns are the one who fear the election. But we don't fear the election. If the democracy is, the democracy is the only way that will allow people of South Sudan to choose their leader instead of somebody imposing or somebody wanted to impose himself.
All right,
that's the way forward.
I'm going to wrap up here. Ateni and Emmanuel and James and Brian, really thank you for your insight. It's a very depressing conversation, I'm going to say.
Absolutely.
It's depressing. I wish I could see some way forward and some hope. I hear grievances and counter grievances. Omar, what do you have?
I'll leave you with a couple of thoughts from our community who blame both leaders. We have ASA over here who says this is simple. The vice president of South Sudan wants to be president and the president wants to be a dictator and they don't care about the people. And we have Chase over here that says this is a complex issue. However, the elite should consider the plight of their people and try to make it work.
To be continued. Thank you for watching today's edition of The Stream. We'll see you online.